Go. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another segment of Remote Teaching and Learning Hacks. Today, I am super excited to have Dr. Kerryane Monohan with us. She's a personal friend of mine, which is why I'm really honestly most excited. But she's also a phenomenal educator, a National Geographic Education Fellow who's worked on a lot of citizen science. And I'm going to bring her in. And let's see if I can do this. Good morning, Kerryane. How are you?
Good morning. How are you doing?
Fantastic. So first, tell us a little bit about where you teach and what you teach and your interest in this sourdough project.
So I teach life and environmental sciences at a school in Florida on a little barrier island. So it's kind of a unique setting. And I focus on citizen science as a way to engage students in kind of authentic science. And that stems from the fact that long before I was a teacher, I was a research scientist, actually in neurobiology, but I've sort of really shifted into environmental and conservation science.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead. You are sort of YouTube famous, and I'm going to go ahead and share the video that you made about this project that we're going to talk about today, Sourdough for Science.
Hi there, it's Dr. Kerryane. Citizen science has always been a great way to participate in science, but now it also offers a powerful gateway to learning. Today, I'm going to introduce you to one of my favorite projects available on scistarter.org, Sourdough Science. And I'm going to give you some tips on how to extend the learning beyond the science of the project. Humans have been making, baking, and eating bread for over 10,000 years. But scientists still don't know a lot about those microbes that give us all those delicious carbs. Participating in this project will help scientists to better understand how the types of flour influence microbial growth. And those microbes, in turn, determine the texture, flavor, and aroma of the bread that we love to eat. This project is a great jumping off point for a bunch of important topics in biology and chemistry. You can extend your learning into microbes, pH, anaerobic and aerobic respiration, fermentation, data collection, and graphing, just to name a few. So let's go over the basics of what doing this project looks like, and then I'll come back and give you some ideas for how to go even further. The Sourdough Science Citizen Science Project is great for the classroom or home because it doesn't require a lot of specialized supplies, and you can ramp it up or ramp it down depending on the age and ability of the students you're working with. You probably will need to special order some pH papers from a place like Amazon. Other than that, you should be able to round up everything else in your house or classroom. Go to the website and you can download detailed directions and a materials list and print off a copy of the data sheet that you'll need to record all of your observations. Once you have everything in place, you're going to set up your experiment, something like this. Notice that each jar has a label. Those labels include the start date, the type of flour in the jar, and my initials, so we know who did what when. And every day, we're going to take some important measurements. One, we're going to measure our pH each day with a new fresh pH strip. You're going to touch it to the back of your sample so it doesn't discolor your pH squares. That'll just make it easier to read when you go to compare it against the color chart. You're also going to measure the height of your starter each day, and both of those measurements will be recorded on your data sheet. And lastly, you also want to do an aroma test most days, which means you're going to need to uncap it just like you would to do the pH or the height measurement, and then you're going to take a big whiff, and this one smells really sour. It's well on its way to forming a great sourdough starter. Then you can cover it back up and put it back in a spot without direct sunlight. After 14 days, you'll have completed your data sheet and have a sourdough starter. It's not citizen science until the data has been submitted. So make sure at the end of the experiment, you upload all of your amazing data on scistarter.org so scientists can start analyzing your findings. Transcribe your data into the digital file, upload a photo of your data sheet, upload photos of your starter, and click submit. And bam, you're doing CitSci like a pro. Let's talk about ways to extend our learning from this project.
I thought that would be a good segue point because that's what we're going to talk about now, in person, real time. And just as someone who has coordinated citizen science projects in the past, I really appreciate how you mentioned submit the data. Because sometimes, especially when this is in an educational setting, we get the education piece out of it, but it's not science till the data is submitted. So thanks for that.
Of course.
So tell us how this is a great video. It's super exciting, and I don't think I mentioned it to you yet, but this week on our live streams, we're doing all sourdough science. So in fact, in about an hour, we'll be having a cooking demonstration with some sourdough starter that we made earlier in the week.
Love
but
it.
tell us, what does this look like in your classroom? How is this showing up, especially remotely? What are you doing with your family?
So my initial plan with sourdough science had been to do it in the classroom, but unfortunately we weren't back in the classroom, so I had to shift it to a remote or distance learning model. And the initial plan had been to do it in my 9th grade biology class, but as I looked at our new schedule, time was going to be an issue, and also we were starting to see that students and teachers and parents were feeling a little disconnected. So I decided to actually pull it out of my biology class and create an entire separate course that students and parents could opt into as family teams. It was actually a requirement that they had to participate as a team. There had to be at least one adult and one non-adult. And we got really great support and feedback. Families were excited to join in. And so we would just meet once a week via Zoom or Google Meet or whatever your meeting platform is. And we enveloped in a whole bunch of science content, which for teachers teaching in a public school, it was definitely like content connected to standards. We're not super standards focused at my school, but I am standards focused. So I always look to the NGSS and sort of, figure out like, am I in the right place? Am I hitting the right targets for grade bands and cognitive development, all those kinds of pieces. So we wrapped it all in and we opened it up to all grade bands. So we had little kids as young as kindergarten, all the way up to juniors in high school and at least one of their parents or guardians. And off we went on a 3-week mini course adventure, and it was great. I don't know, you want me to dig in further there, or where do you want me to go next?
Yeah, in fact, I just popped on to say, show us this mini course, because I think a lot of the people who will be watching this, that's the kind of thing that they're looking for.
Sure. So I'm going to just pull up. I was hoping that I was going to be able to open this one thing, and I'm going to try one more time, but it's just not cooperating. So what I did initially was I actually created a slide deck that I shared with the participants in the course. And each of our 3 meetings, we learned something about the science or something about the history, because I love interdisciplinary learning. So it doesn't have to just be science. You can wrap in things like geography, you can wrap in things like history, you can wrap in literacy. So all these components come together. So each day that we met, we had some piece like that. And then we also talked about how to do the experiment on day 1. And then in subsequent classes, each group shared their data. So hopefully on your screen right now, you're seeing Team Zoograve, and this was their data on our last day, so of the classes. So you can see they're up to day 8 here with their pHs. And it's kind of interesting data, right? Because we see it actually increases in pH and then falls again, then kind of bottoms out and then starts to rise. So it'll be really interesting to see. And this course is actually still going. So it'll be interesting to see where their data goes next. And we always had teams submit pictures if they were comfortable doing that. And so if I just flip through this slide deck a little bit, here are some observations from their team. These were young elementary school students, so this is a great opportunity for them to practice detailed observation and writing, which I just love. And then if we skip over, here was a middle school team, so you can see they're still early on in their data collection, but they've got some great pictures of their setup here and of them doing the work. And I think this was one of our high school teams. Some of them have some creative names. And you can see they're collecting their observations here, which is so critical to good science. It's not always about the quantitative data, although I'm a numbers person and I love it. But sometimes those more subjective or qualitative observations are what are game changers in discovery and understanding. And then here's another team. You can see they're collecting their data. They're comparing 2 different kinds of flour. So they're going to be able to see, are there differences in the pH? And they're also this is part of these yeast facts that you see is because one of their assignments was to read articles on sourdough starters and the history of sourdough starters, and they had to grab some of those more interesting facts and then they shared them out when we were in live sessions. So they were doing some teaching and learning themselves. It wasn't all just about me as the teacher. They really loved the story about how and I'm just going to come back here so they really love the story of some really cool American history about sourdough starter. So back when the gold miners started heading out west, they actually traveled with sourdough starter because of course there were no stores to go pick up yeast, right? So they not only did they carry it with them, but they slept with it at night. And so one of the big questions out to the class was, why would they be sleeping with their jar of sourdough starter? And we had already talked about some of the science. So about microbial activity, about anaerobic respiration, aerobic respiration, fermentation. So we had talked about things like that. And all of a sudden, one of my youngest kids was like, oh my gosh, because it would be really cold and they needed to keep it warm so it would keep dividing. And I was like, yes, right? Like it's a great example of critical thinking and problem solving skills, and it's engaging. So we tied in, into that history piece after doing all the hard science in terms of fermentation. So that was kind of fun. So yeah, that's kind of how I designed the course, is alternating between the science and then the history. And then we also did some geography in terms of how the microbes and the yeast strains that you find around the world are going to vary depending on where you are. And what we're seeing is that even in our small county, we live in different areas of the county and we're seeing different data. So that would suggest that we may even have different strains of yeast in our homes and possibly, regionally within this county area. So those people living on the coast might have very different strains than those of us that live out west and closer to pasture land and livestock. So some really interesting pieces there.
Yeah, I mean, and because now I'm thinking, most of the people who are watching this or who will be watching this we're smack dab in the middle of the country as far as you can get from the ocean, literally in North America. And so now I'm like, I wonder what our data will show and what kind of yeast we have. And would ours, because I'm seeing a little bit of the pattern on this very small, I think N=3 data set of, you start out, then you go up in pH and then you go down. And boy, they're like, like all good research, it raises more questions than it answers. So
yeah, and that's the piece that we want to kind of get from the students, right? Is I'm always asking them in these live sessions, like, so what does this make you wonder? you know? And I love that. That's kind of one of my keywords. I'm always using the word wonder, like, what are you wondering right now? Do you have any wonderings? You know, because like you said, asking questions is probably one of the most powerful tools for learning. So if you can get kids to ask questions, that builds curiosity, it builds engagement, it makes them want to seek out more information. They are more willing to take on some of the hard work, like reading articles, which is another piece of this class that I did. I actually pulled down scientific articles at the professional university level, and the older kids were reading those and then pulling out information to share with the younger kids. And then I had some different kinds of more appropriate reading for the younger kids so that they could share their information as well with the older kids. I really love the dynamic of kids teaching kids. I just think, especially right now, I think people need that connectivity. And I think kids are more willing to engage with other students outside of their age range right now because they're kind of desperate for any kind of social interaction. And we might as well harness it, right? So just trying to, I wish we could just be in the classroom, but if I can't be, then I'm going to try to figure out how can I, wring the most out of this learning adventure that we're in right now.
So, yeah, those are such great points about what this looks like, particularly in a remote setting, and how to really leverage the connectivity piece of it. Putting you a little bit on the spot is looking forward. I'm seeing a lot of chatter in education, social media about some anxiety around fall. What's gonna happen in the fall? So this is a great activity. How are you thinking about this for next year, knowing we might have to pivot again? What kinds of lessons learned are you bringing forward?
So within my families are, relatively speaking, well resourced. So when I set up this mini course and I said, look, the one thing that you're not going to have in your house are these pH strips that you're going to need to order, probably from someplace like Amazon, although there are other sources as well. That was something that was doable for those families. But that is not the case for every family in the United States. So first of all, I should point out, I do lots of other citizen science projects in my classes, and I have been for several years now. And many of them require nothing but your eyes and your hands. And some kind of device typically. Although even that piece can be addressed if you shift to paper recording of observations and the teacher can then submit the data. That actually addresses a lot of issues, not just the device issue, but also potentially privacy issues, depending on how your school operates, things like that. But I think what teachers are going to really need to think about, and certainly I am, is I've been thinking about, can I put together a kit in advance with the supplies that students are going to need to do at-home laboratory investigations, whether they're citizen science or more traditional classroom laboratory investigations. Can I put together those kits, and can they either be, picked up on a schedule at the school that meets all of the rules for social distancing, or do we need to mail them out? And what kinds of labs and citizen science can we realistically provide the necessary materials and equipment for, within relatively, it's going to have to be a relatively small box, and we probably want to be able to ship out like a semester's worth. So I think there is a lot of thinking that needs to be done, budgeting that has to be accounted for, and everybody's going to be in a different place on what that piece is going to look like. And I think the most important piece of that is that teachers need to really think, what are the essential skills that I cannot imagine my students leaving this particular academic year without experiencing or mastering? So, in my class, we do labs probably once a week, sometimes more. That's not how it's going to be if we are remote learning next fall or this coming fall. So I'm going to have to really choose. And I think that's going to be painstaking. But it just means we got to choose the ones we do, and we have to do them better than ever. And we can do it. I know we can. We have to.
Those are great words. They're comforting words. I think people who are looking for a way forward will take your bits of wisdom and feel like you're confirming things they've been thinking, or you're giving them new things to think about. So thank you for sharing that. It's obviously you've put a lot of thought and time and effort into these thoughts, and we'll put a whole lot more before this is all done. But the more we connect, the stronger we are. So if anybody out there, I'm not seeing any questions come in through the chat, but if you do have a question post broadcast, please just put it in the chat. I'll make sure that Kerryane sees it, and we'll circle back around and we'll try to help you figure things out. So thank you, Kerryane, for sharing your wonderful energy and expertise and your stories. And so everybody else, stay safe, stay curious, and go explore.